We're here for the Psychedelic Storytelling webinar. Very exciting. We have Pam Kryskow, our Board of Directors member, who is going to be interviewing our past Executive Director, Cory Firth. I am not going to say much more and just hand it over to Pam now, and welcome everyone and have fun and enjoy.
Thanks, Cheryl. You're awesome. Thanks for doing all the tech for this, and thanks for all the other volunteers that have helped out here. If this is your first time watching us at the Psychedelic Association of Canada, big shout out I want to all our volunteers. We have amazing volunteers that help us make all this stuff happen. And really, we only have 1.5 paid folks at the Psychedelic Association of Canada. So it's really quite epic what this organization does accomplish. And a big shout out to Cory as well. As Cheryl said, Cory was our very first executive director and did an absolutely phenomenal job with us. And we were so happy that he stayed with us. And then he went on to bigger and better things. So he is now at the Nikean Foundation. So Cory, let's jump right in. Why don't you tell everybody that's watching, tell us about the Nikean Foundation and tell us about this storytelling project.
Yeah, thanks, Pam. And thank you, Cheryl, and all the volunteers. Really wonderful to be back, dropping in with all you guys and catching up on lost time. I wouldn't say I went on to bigger and better things necessarily, but I'm glad we're able to collaborate on this project a little bit and share some more about what's going on. So yeah, like Pam mentioned, I'm over at the Nikean Foundation now, and my new title is Chief Storyteller. That is a real job title, and it's a fun one. And what we've done over at Nikean is developed the Psychedelic Storytelling Project. So many of you have probably seen it throughout some of the webinar promotion that Cheryl did in advance of this, and maybe you checked out the site. But essentially what we're doing is we're building a platform for psychedelic storytelling. We believe our sort of mantra for the project has been that if we transform out loud, then we prevent others from suffering in silence. So we kind of looked at the gap in education and in culture, which I think we're going to talk about today in terms of how we can expand access to the potential of what psychedelics can provide for us as we continue to see them evolve into the mainstream. And we looked at storytelling as the antidote for what that gap was that we identified, and thought, most people that have tried a psychedelic in a therapeutic way, I would say, actually probably in any way, they did so because of a friend told them a story about it, or a colleague or a family member. And so we kind of thought, let's kind of add a little fuel to that fire and see if we can't amplify the idea of storytelling as a way to expand into the cultural evolution of where psychedelics are headed. And it's a really interesting time now because there's a lot of talk around psychedelics in healthcare and in therapeutics. But when we look at religions and family systems and the way we eat, the way we dress, all the things that make up our culture, psychedelics have an impact on all of those things too. So we're really excited to be launching this project, and we're kind of in soft launch mode. So feel free, if you've been on there, to go in and play around and break things so that our developers can fix up the platform. But what's the outcome of the project is a platform that we're continuing to evolve. And the muse for us in the beginning, and I'm sure we can dive into all the golden threads that I'm rambling on about now, but the muse for us with this project was TED Talks, because we looked at all these different options around how do we deliver stories and what's the best way to do it? What's the easiest, most viable sort of first version of this that we can get out there? And TED has a really cool platform where you go on and you plug in keywords around politics or climate change. And we thought, wouldn't it be cool to have a platform where you could plug in search queries around PTSD and MDMA, or end-of-life anxiety and psilocybin. And then that's what's been born out of that original strategy and kind of where we are today. So yeah, excited to be here and share more about it.
Well, and what a wonderful way to really contribute to culture, and at all levels, culture, science, medicine. I mean, who doesn't like sitting around a campfire and hearing a good story? like that, we really love that. We lean into it, or, you know, that friend or family member who's always telling stories, and it's like, wow, like, you know, that's how we carry our culture forward. And I think it's really in our bones to really hear stories. And a project like this, you know, when you really hear people's stories of transformation, it really is quite different than reading a science or a science report, or an article, a scientific journal article, or even the news or anything. So you've been doing this now for a little bit, like you said, in stealth mode, and launching it big here soon, or now, I guess. What are you learning as you I mean, you get to do these interviews. I've done mine with you. It was absolutely wonderful to do that. What's sticking out as you get to sit with all these individuals across Canada and telling you their stories?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think I'll start with a story, actually. And I've been saying that storytelling is a gateway drug, because it really is, I mean, it can be mind manifesting or it can be mind manipulating. Stories can shape us positively and negatively. And we've seen that with the existing story for the last 50 years with psychedelics. And I hope we can sort of push the edges a little bit today, Pam, and talk a little bit about some of that stuff too. I know that's stuff you're excited about. Yeah, some of the things that have been popping out. I guess, sorry, the story that I wanted to tell was the first time that I was exposed to drugs in any form. I was a third or fourth grader, so about 8, 9, 10, maybe, in elementary school. Just an innocent kid, like anyone at that age. Really, the interesting things for me were playing baseball, getting dirty, playing with my friends, wondering what my parents were up to. Nothing intense. And then one day we got ushered into, and I had not been exposed to the idea of drugs in any form. My friends weren't, you know, I'm grade 4, I'm not very old. One day I was ushered into the library by my grade 4 teacher, and all the library books and shelves had been moved out of the way. And there were 4 big burly cops standing in the middle of the library around a 4x6 masking tape rectangle on the ground. We all sat around this rectangle, sitting around campfires. And we heard a story about drugs. We heard a story about marijuana. And it was that marijuana is a gateway drug. And if you take marijuana, then you'll end up in this jail cell for the rest of your life. And so that was my first exposure to marijuana. And since then, we've obviously learned a lot about what cannabis can provide, and psychedelics too. But we weren't even introduced to psychedelics or anything like that in any form, other than this is scary, don't do this, it leads to harmful other things. And I guess to segue into what your question was, the things that I'm learning about are that everyone had that same sort of messaging given to them. Not everyone, a large majority of people had been given that same message: drugs are bad, don't do drugs. But the truth was, once they exposed themselves to it through a story from a friend or a family member, they were able to see some sort of shift. And we use transformation instead of like healing because it's a little bit more broad. So transformation can include things like personal development, professional development, creativity, healing, trauma, emotions, mental health, that kind of stuff. And so the commonalities that I'm seeing across the board are just that they've all been exposed to some sort of like propaganda against drugs. A strong majority of people have been exposed to the positivity and the intentionality of psychedelics and drugs in general through a friend or a friend of a friend or a family member. And then I think the last interesting piece that I'm still trying to figure out, because one of the questions I always ask at the end of the storytelling piece is, what's one tool or resource you would recommend? And I would say anecdotally, I should go back and look at all of these, but around 8 or 9 out of 10 say community, or find a person to talk to, or find, you know, people that have had experiences that you can share with. And so those are kind of the 3 like big things that pop out to me. And there's probably many more. And I do hope to find, maybe Pam, you could help me connect to a student that would maybe want to poke into some research around this and just see what some of those dots are that we could connect on this. Because there is a lot. I've done about 100 hours of storytelling, story capturing, I call it story finding, over the last 2.5 months. And we've got probably another 100 hours before the end of the year kind of ready. So it's fascinating to see what's all coming together and the bigger narrative that's forming around everybody's story together too, which is cool.
Yeah, I'll jam on that, what you just said there. If there's any PhD students out there looking for a project, this would be thematic analysis. It's actually got a name. It's going through these stories and looking for the themes and seeing how many themes are there before we run out of new themes. So thematic analysis, Cory, you might just get yourself a PhD student to work with you on this project. It would be a great published story. And you know, that those messaging, you're right, this story, the storytelling, right, from our younger years, you know, is, for me, it was the Nancy Reagan, this is your brain on drugs, this is the egg in the frying pan. And really that was the extent of it and nothing more than that. And then, you know, as I went into my first degree in criminology, you know, one of the best questions I ever heard asked by one of the professors was, who stands to make money if these drugs, or others would call them medicines in other cultures, stay illegal? And that was a lot of his work. And a lot of his work was on the organized crime, that the longer these medicines stayed illegal, the more organized crime had. So these kind of stories, you know, start to make sense when you start to string them together. So what?
Yeah, now it's like organized care, right? Now it's like, now can we transition that to organized care? And the culture, the idea of culture too, and all this whole conversation, like culture, the root of the word culture comes around cultivation and care. It mirrors the idea of like building and manifesting together. And so storytelling is a really powerful powerful tool for changing that narrative, I think. I see someone said volumes off. Is that me or is that you?
That may be me. I know that volumes are fine on our
Cheryl
end.
says
Yes,
things are good.
Yeah, okay. Well, that may be me, and I apologize if I'm coming in quiet. I'll bring myself a little too close for comfort to this phone, but I'm at a busy conference hall and there's a little bit of background noise.
I can hear you fine.
Oh, okay, good. And so maybe so you talked about, you kind of alluded to it earlier, about, you know, pressing the edges, pushing the edges here. And who are we pressing the edges for? Like who are these? I mean, not only will they build community as people hear their stories told and other people's stories, but to press the edge to get, what do you hope that this might do?
Well, actually, since leaving the Psychedelic Association, I really tried to come back to my community, my local community here in Kingston. And I was able to see just a little bit about what were the needs here. And then I also recently had a baby, as you know. She's now 17 months. And so personally, I think that one of the biggest impacts that psychedelics can have is on our two of the biggest impacts that psychedelics can have are on our families and on our communities. And so I personally am really excited to see how just psychedelics in general, how they can shift communities, bring communities back together after this last long period of isolation, and shift the way families are thinking about how they want to raise kids and how they want to show up for themselves and each other in relationship. And so those are the two like areas that I think psychedelics are really, you know, interesting from my perspective. And then I think when it comes to storytelling, I think from that lens of those two big drivers there, or big impact foundational things for me, I think storytelling allows for is a real momentum mover for that to happen. Like you said before, there's a lot of really great research out there and a lot of really great data. And what I'm about to say is not to poo-poo on any of that, because I have a lot of tremendous respect for that. The net, it's so needed for everything right now, especially at the regulatory level. But people don't make decisions based on data points and features and benefits. They make a decision based on emotion. And the best way to elicit emotion in someone else is by telling them a story. And so if we really want to change somebody's minds, we first have to tell them how we changed ours. And a lot of people, as you know, with Michael Pollan's book, How to Change Your Mind, change their minds through these medicines. And so it's important for us to, all of us, step up and tell our story, not just the Michael Pollans or the Paul Stamets or the Rick Doblins or the Tim Ferrisses, all the great, amazing folks that we all stand on the shoulders of because of all the work that they've done. But now it's time for all of us to take a stand here and join the conversation and join the story, because we're all a chapter, we're all a page, we're all a word, we're all whatever the analogy might be with a book. And we all have the chance to be a part of the narrative of change. And this, we keep saying this idea of a new paradigm, but we all have a chance to be a part of whatever that new paradigm looks like. And I think the best way to do that is through telling your story.
Sorry, I couldn't find the mute button there. Yeah, it's one of those days. And you know, it is, those stories are also come farther and a ripple out even. So I know, like through the Root Survive program with the therapy we do, quite often it's the stories from those removed from the therapy. It's the family, it's the friends that say, oh my goodness, I just saw Mary and what a different person. And that re-engagement. So those stories coming from other people are kids saying, what happened to my dad? He's amazing. Who is this guy that came home? And those stories too. So have you had a chance to capture any stories like that, like one ripple away from people that maybe have not had psychedelics, but have the story of watching somebody that they care for dearly in their life transform?
Yeah, great. Oh, I love that you brought that up, because so one of the things we're doing right now is user experience stories. And so we're really focused in on that, but we have a series of different series planned for different categories that are really interesting. Like we want to do story series on facilitators, for example, therapists and MDs and sitters and guides and shamans. And we want to do stories around, one of the really cool story angles is veterans' wives, veterans' partners, their experience with psychedelics actually healing their internal trauma. I had a really powerful experience listening to one woman's story around her family trauma with her partner. I won't say her name, but she's on the site and you can find it. And what she shared was that she actually was severely depressed, had a lot of mental illness, and she was on SSRIs. And her husband was being deployed, and he was applying for a position. And in order to apply for the position, she was told to go off her medication so that through the application process, they wouldn't see that his wife had some mental illness, that she couldn't keep the house safe and secure and comfortable while he's away. So she went off her medication, had a really bad episode, had something really bad happen, and anyway, she transformed and went through some really amazing personal experiences with psychedelics, and she has a whole cool story to tell. And so that's not really the question you asked, but I just thought that was a cool angle for like sort of the ripple you were talking about. But one of the angles that I really want to talk about, and I really want, you're at a conference right now, one of the things I think would be cool at a conference level, and we're looking at a few different conferences in the new year to do this, is bringing the story around the entire experience of where we're at today. So having a researcher come in and tell their story of their research, which is typically what happens at a conference now. But then you have a facilitator come in and talk about that same research, but the actual delivery of that experience and what's the story behind that. And then you bring a patient, maybe they're involved in that study. There's some ethical stuff that you can't really do with that. So maybe it's just someone removed, but it had a similar experience with that medicine and that protocol, for example, bring in that story. And then you bring in their support person, whoever that caregiver is. One of the really beautiful, kind of chokes me up thinking about him, is Thomas Hartle. The beautiful stories that I've found are these end-of-life anxiety type stories that you start to hear from a guy like Thomas Hartle, who we're all familiar with. But there's another gentleman, Steve Allgood, who shared his story on our site too. And we have many others coming through on the end-of-life anxiety side, but I'm starting to tap into their partners and their families, and we're starting to build relationships like that. And they're opening up and telling their stories of what it was like to see them go through that transition. And Steve, for example, he's in remission now from an end-of-life diagnosis. And so like his story is incredible. And not that Thomas's isn't or anyone else's isn't, but there's some magical stories around, kind of, I guess, coming back full circle to the idea of family, where it's like this person has shifted something so dramatically that it ripples through their family, then it ripples through their community, then it ripples through their job and I think this is, it's a national, international, it's a worldwide thing that can happen here. And these stories are really beautiful to I feel very grateful to be able to hear them, but to be able to put them out and give them their light in the bigger picture, or their voice in the bigger narrative. It's really fun to see it kind of coming through.
So people know what you're talking about. Can you walk people through what telling their story with you at Nikean looks like?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. I should have brought up the visual that I have. I'll send it to you. Maybe you can include it in some of the post stuff, or I'll put it in the member link, actually, in the member platform. So we came up with something called the Psychedelic Seeker's Journey, which is like the hero's journey, but with a psychedelic twist. And I'm sure you can all put the pieces together for that. But we realized that the hero's journey kind of has a bit of a continuum approach to it, but it almost has like an ending point, where we realize, like with psychedelics, there's no real end. It's just more of a continuum. And with that seeker's journey, it's sort of a continuum. And with, I think as you tap into these things a little bit more, we kind of realize that we're not really done here when we die. There's something that lives on beyond this. So we start to think about like what that experience is like for someone who's seeking psychedelics, who's looking out for information. So we kind of all went back through the strategy process of trying to understand what was it like when we were at this place of trying to figure out something's off. I'm curious about something. I need to transform something. I've got some emotional health, concern or a mental illness, and I want to shift something. I want to change something. What am I going to do? The first thing we want to identify is the character. So we have a lot of questions around that, and I'll take you through the question process in a sec. But we kind of identified this piece, and the character is the really important piece at the top, and it's kind of who you are and where you're at in life. And then you kind of go through a series of sort of like order-based stuff, which is where we're kind of in the known. These are things we know about. I'm struggling with something, or I'm curious about something, and I'm interested in seeing how I can learn more about it. And then you kind of move into the unknown, and a lot of folks will try different things. They might try meditation or yoga or silent retreat or SSRIs and therapy and all of these things. And they go through this trial and error period of testing things out. And then they connect with psychedelics and they have an experience. And through that experience, they get some insights and they understand a little bit more about what they were troubled with, that curiosity or that pain point that they were having. And they understand a little bit more about what they need to shift, what they need to do, some actions they need to take. And then they come back, and that's when integration happens. And integration for me is just action. It's just taking steps towards the things that you were aware of through the experience. And then part of the kind of integration process is you take those insights, you come back, you hopefully integrate them for yourself, but then you tell others about it. And then you tell others about it, and then you continue on your journey, and often it comes back. So the character has changed a little bit. It's become a little bit more of what it's supposed to become. And then it kind of goes back in. It's in that order. It kind of maybe moves into chaos again and comes back into order and continues on. And hopefully it's bringing others along the way with it. And that's where the story comes in. And so then when we kind of took that model and started to apply some questions to it, we've battle tested and kind of worked through a bunch of different ideas of what the format was going to look like. First, what does the psychedelic seeker want? That's who our audience is. So those folks that are looking for more information about psychedelics, maybe they've been conditioned by the war on drugs, or maybe they've had a recreational experience when they were younger and now they're hearing about the therapeutic approach and they're looking for more details of what that looks like. What do they want? So we realized that they don't want the broad, this is my experience with all psychedelics, and I've had 10 different journeys and they span from 20 years and all this kind of stuff. It's too much information from them. They just want one detailed story. And so we nailed down these sort of 10 to 12 questions, and we've optimized them. Actually, I continue to tweak them every time I do a story, because we're always learning and it's always growing, and it's this really beautiful kind of blossoming of what's to come with the bigger version of this as we maybe do some in-person stuff. And so there's about 10 or 12 questions we take you through, and we again try to identify like who the character is. So we talk about life before psychedelics. What was your childhood like? What was your well-being like? What is your relationship like with your family? What were your relationships like with your partner and your kids and all that kind of stuff? So we define the character, we set the stage for the bigger story. And then we talk about how you were first exposed to the idea that psychedelics could be used in a meaningful way, because that's what we're trying to accomplish with the stories, is the idea of transformation. And there's a lot of transformation that happens in the recreational story too, and we can pull on that thread if you'd like as well, because there's some really great stories on that side too. Someone said to me recently that recreation is recreation, which I thought was a beautiful kind of mantra to hold as you're thinking about the recreational experience. But then we go into the experience itself. So like leading up to the experience, what was that thing you were curious about or looking to transform? Not everyone at that point knows the idea of setting an intention. So we kind of come back with the language around what you were actually kind of going into it with, maybe not knowing about intention setting at that point. And then we give the storyteller a chance to just kind of explore creatively as much as they'd like, with as much detail and transparency as they want, around what the experience was like from beginning to end, going from sort of that preparatory phase of leading up to it. Sometimes, you know, with folks doing ayahuasca, they're doing a dieta, so they share a little bit about that. And then they share about the ceremonies that they went through. And sometimes the kind of one experience idea can be, especially with ayahuasca, usually there's a stack of a few different ceremonies there. So that's considered kind of one experience. So they tell the details of all of that. And I kind of probe a little bit here and there around detail, but typically everyone, once they've gone through the primer and the warm up and some of these questions, they're pretty loose and they're back in that experience, and they're able to talk about the visuals, they're talking about the insights. It's really cool to see, as we've massaged and improved the questions, how more open and how more descriptive people are with that question there, that kind of middle piece. And then when we kind of come out of the experience itself, I like to poke about some key insights, because that's kind of the helpful knowledge exchange piece, where it's like, okay, we can talk about the story and the craziness of things that happened potentially, but what are the real like insights you've gathered, and then how they affected your life? And so we ask a question along those lines to then gather the information that we can then exchange with the watcher, the audience, around what the big pieces that they took back into their life and how has it impacted them. And it's always big stuff. Like, it's, as you have all seen, anyone listening probably too, that have heard stories from people around the transformational side, like it seems to be always these big shifting things. And then we go into, because one of the elements of this is about harm reduction for us. So we want to make sure we talk about like, how did you integrate this experience, and then offer them a chance to sort of give some actual advice. So we say like, what's one tool or resource you would recommend for someone at the beginning of their journey, especially when we talk about the recreational side or the maybe less intentional experiences that people share. They often have a little bit of a lesson for someone around safety. And so it's like, make sure you have a guide, make like just things that they didn't think about. They've done it up, they did it on their own, and they were in the wrong container, and they, you know, opened up and it wasn't the right space, but then they went home and then they had this magical sort of experience. They would have recommended that you do that intentionally and bring someone in there, for example. And then we always ask, why is it important to tell your psychedelic story? Because it's really cool to see why people think it's important. So that's kind of the flow of like where it came from, the model we developed, and then the actual, like the action of capturing the story. We call it the story finding process. So that's kind of the flow of it all.
So I know somebody's going to want to know this answer, and they're thinking about it. Have you had stories that are not stories gone well?
Yeah. Well, I guess maybe we're one of the things that we're doing is with the messaging and the branding of what we're doing. Maybe we're not out there enough asking for those. And maybe that's one of those things that we need to reflect on a little bit, to say like, let's make sure we're telling the whole story. However, I guess as I think about that, that's been the story for the last 50 years. So maybe we don't need to do that as much, but we're not turning those away by any means. If we have had a few people that are like, hey, my story isn't so pleasant, do you mind if I tell it anyway? And I always say, yeah, let's tell it. And if you don't want it to be shared, then we won't share it. We haven't turned any stories away. And oftentimes by the end of the experience, they're talking about the positive side of it. And there's a woman that shared a really intense story of her experience down in the Amazon, where a retreat center that she went to, a really traditional Shipibo retreat center. She was there for some really deep work, her first experience. And there was a kind of a competing retreat from a group of settlers there that had come in and taken over and built a retreat center. And the shamans were actually kind of, and this sounds a little bit out there, so I apologize for anyone that this might sound a little too woo-woo, but the shamans were kind of competing in the ceremony spiritually. And she was kind of caught up in the middle of it. And this is one of her first experiences. She's like not prepared for this in any way. And so she shared that experience with us and the importance of checking, doing your due diligence before you go to a facility, knowing more about the traditional side of how this works and what you can get into when you step into these experiences in these realms. And so, yeah, it was troubling for her. There was a lot of beautiful kind of growth and transformation that comes out the other side. That was just one ceremony that she was in. But yeah, she definitely, and there's more stories, like there are a lot more stories like that. So yeah, there's a lot, but typically most of the stories, they end in, yeah, it sucked, but I learned this about it. So it's hard to say if they're bad in the end. Everyone says, you hear a lot of the times there's no bad trips. I don't know if that's true or not, but there's definitely ways to learn through every experience, I believe.
Yeah, I think it would certainly add a richness to it. Not only, I mean, the one thing that it really does add, if you do have stories of sessions, perhaps maybe it's not the bad trip. I mean, I agree, there are no bad trips, there's challenging trips, but the session gone not well is really a learning point and could be a rich source of quality improvement of how, when you know how not to do it, then you know how to do it also and not repeat it. So you may end up with a project that actually really contributes to the therapeutic guidance of what is working, what is absolutely not working.
I think that'd be interesting, going back to your thematic analysis side of things, taking that potential project that could exist if someone is interested, by the way, continue to probe that, to put that piece together as well, because that is amazing for someone like you who's delivering this stuff, right? To know what the actual experience is like for some individual, because that's one of the hardest things with the research right now, is you're not quite getting that type of level of detail, right? So that'd be really interesting to pair that up.
Yeah, and what you're getting in a lot of the clinical trials, they're doing their best and they have to do it within a clinical trial structure, but they're getting a very non-individualized, a very like this, then this, and this, very checkboxy. So I think there's a lot of richness there, and anybody that is working with these medicines, absolutely, I would hope wants to be really the best of the best. And so the best way to become the best is to know what's not working and what is 5-star therapy and support, or whatever, however you want to label it. Another question then another thought for you, me, Cory knows this from working with me at the Psychedelic Association. I'm always tossing ideas. Have you thought of a pre-seeker series? So somebody's thinking about having a session and having them record something about who they are at that point, and then coming back, at a time frame after a session to record who they are now.
Yes, 100%. So that's really kind of the goal for this, is to be able to connect the dots full circle. So they came to the site, they saw a couple stories, they did their research elsewhere, and then they went and had an experience, and then they came back and shared their story. So we haven't got that for like that pre set of questions and processes figured out. And there might be, my hypothesis is that people in that stage maybe don't want to share their story at this point. So that's one thought that I have, but it's not to turn it away. It's just to think about it and be curious about. But yeah, it's a really interesting thing that we're trying to figure out too. And we have some ideas for this next version of what's coming soon, where yeah, you can connect to somewhere and then actually come back and share your story. And then you can, one of the things that I would love to do, and I've been calling it a psychedelic pen pal, which is maybe not the best word for it, but it's a good sort of framing for it to this point. We're not going to maybe use that, but the idea that you could connect with a storyteller at that stage, that pre-stage, and actually go deeper on the story with them and ask them questions and kind of get some more feedback from them on their experience, to bring that human connection back into it, like what stories are really meant to do. At this point, we're telling stories, but the beautiful thing about stories is to be able to engage with them. And that's one of those things we want to do to add to that seeker's journey. So yes, sort of what you asked, yes. And then like, yes, and I guess.
I want to invite, somebody's got a story for you. So I'm going to say he probably does want the story. So go to the Nikean website, and Cheryl's been putting it in the chat box for us a few times here, where you can arrange a time to tell your story. And if others in watching have any questions, please feel free to type them into the chat box. Now,
I'm just seeing this now.
Pardon me? Are there some there?
Oh, I'm just seeing this now. Hi, everyone. Sorry, I'm Marissa and Bon, and sorry, I'm just in the chat now. I'll stop.
Yes. What would you say to somebody that says, you're just like, this is just really glorifying drug use, and we really shouldn't be, these people get addicted, people like, what are you doing? Like, this is harmful.
Yeah, well, we've been glorifying all that harm for the last 50 years. The story and the narrative for these things have been just that, what you're describing. So we need to shift the narrative. We need to tell the stories of positivity and transformation as a way to, I've been using the word education, but I really like the idea of knowledge exchange or knowledge mobilization, where telling these stories actually has a bigger impact on the ability to change that narrative and that negative experience that we've all been going through with the vilification of these medicines. And so yeah, if that's the opinion, then maybe they think we're partaking in what's already been happening over the years. So we're trying to take a similar approach to what the war on drugs really did, but bring it into a more light-based place and bring the positive side of it to this. And the other thing is that, like, what's really fascinating is how many people have signed up and been so willing to tell their story. I always ask at the beginning, is there anything that I should avoid asking you about with your experience? And almost everyone says no. I'm an open book. I'm an open book. I'm an open book. I think maybe one person of the 100 hours of stories I've done so far has said, no, like, don't ask me about my mom or something, which all is, for me, everything is, I do that in the beginning to set that safe container so that privacy and that comfortability is there, so that I always avoid that. But it just shows that everybody's willing and ready, and in a lot of ways excited and itching to tell their stories. And I guess I come back to the idea that I like to say that we're the last of the underground, and we're here to kind of move to the main above ground and bring these things into the mainstream, not just in healthcare, but in religion and in our family systems and in our community centers. And these compounds have a potential to impact all of those levels of culture. And the best way to continue moving towards it, as we're doing anyway, is to tell our stories and share those stories. So that would be my response to that. I think you might have a response to that too, wouldn't you?
Well, I believe that we have the right to the best medicines. I don't think we should have to try substandard medicines to get to the best medicine. I think the last 50 years has been a complete error. And people should know that there was no medical evidence or scientific evidence presented to go down the path that we went in 1970. And I think medical professionals should be outraged that these medicines have been taken away from our toolbox. And we will get there with the studies and the research on what medicine for what indication in the biomedical model. And I hope with the storytelling and with the two-eyed seeing approach that we really do integrate the lineages of the peoples of the land on which we have colonized are not invited guests, or if you are still in your ancestral lands, that we find ways of bringing these medicines back. And as you mentioned, not just for the disease state that we have in many ways for our mental health and substance use, but also the wellness. And I know many amazing musicians that it is the psychedelics that have allowed them to become the musician or the painter that they are, because they're so connected with their passion and their vision of what they want their life to be. So at this point, it seems just asinine so that we even have to kind of dance around the stigma of this. It should be so obviously clear. And even I think we're at the tipping point. I hope this project with Nikean tips it even further, that there is no reason not to tell your story here. there is absolutely no reason not to tell your story, because the way we are with the way we treat these medicines is by an error, an error of culture control. And, that sounds like sometimes crazy, but I think we're going to look back. I think generations ahead of us are going to look back and go, these were illegal? Were you guys nuts?
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
what? Things that cured
Yeah.
depression, medicines that have the potential to cure PTSD, anxiety. I mean, they're not for everyone. Like, no one is saying that. No one was saying everyone should have psychedelics, but certainly if you have a condition that can be helped, I think we're going to be mocked. We're going to be mocked just like we mock, medicine of the 1800s and some of the things we did. We're going to be mocked ferociously for not using these medicines. Or for taking
my
these
daughter's gonna laugh.
Yeah,
Rosie's gonna laugh at me for how hard we had to work to get these through. I think you're right.
Let's get some questions here. So I have friends who are becoming more curious about plant medicine experiences based on my recent healing journey. Some of them are still hesitant, but are interested in learning more. I think they would really love to hear some of these stories about people's experience with these medicines. When will these stories be available to the public to be read?
They're live right now on Nikean.org.
They are.
Actually, I think Cheryl has been doing it. Yeah. So, like I said in the beginning, we're kind of in this soft launch period where we've developed the platform. We launched it at Horizons a few weeks ago as a soft launch to just get people in there playing around, give us some feedback. We launched our first 40 stories. We've got 40 stories kind of in the tube, and we've got probably another 50 to maybe 100 before the end of the year that still need to be done, cut up and edited. So lots of stories still coming, and there's no slowing down, it seems. So yeah, it's going to evolve. So you'll see on the site now, there's kind of a general latest stories kind of queue, and then there's some different series, almost like Netflix, where you might come on and see like late night comedies or like strong female lead. We've got different things coming in there too around different themes, and they're going to grow as we add more content to the site. So you'll see it evolving over the next little while, but there's definitely quite a few stories in there and quite a variety so far.
And this can be quite a wealth for, the combination of the storytelling and science. So much of the research that we do comes from case reports from a patient saying, hey, I did this and I'm better. Did you know about that? Like, oh, what? No, I haven't heard about that. And you get curious and you go, well, let's look into this and let's study this. So I can imagine that your storytelling with your new PhD students that hopefully will attract to you, and some thematic analysis and some AI going through all those words and stuff and pulling it together would, there might be some things there that we have never even anticipated. Or actually, let me ask you that then, is there anything, you know a lot about psychedelics, a lot about their ability to transform people. Has there been anything in any of the stories that has like completely like surprised you?
I wouldn't say surprise. There's lots of moving elements, but there's nothing that's popped. There's a lot that's popped out to me in terms of like, yeah, exactly what you were describing. What could we take and then add the data to, add the research to, and then sort of see how it could then be. Unfortunately, we need the science sometimes to legitimize things. I don't think we always do, but we're in that place, and I get it. But I think there's definitely a lot there. The thing that just moves me the most, like almost every single time, is the shell of a person someone describes themselves as, to the point where they're suicidal, they're at the end of the rope, to like pure joy and happiness and just like love. Just the amount of stories that go from that to that are incredible. And that's not just these stories that I've heard on this, because now that I'm the chief storyteller, everyone tells me their story everywhere I go. So, which is awesome. I love that. Keep it up. But they're all like that. They're all like that. So I don't know if you can't put science to that. As much as I'd love to be able to say that, I don't see it. I don't see it needed. and hopefully the stories can kind of add to that. Like you said, the science can be there so that like all the real data can make sense of it for what we need to logically. And then this emotional piece can come through and that can shine. So that's my hope. I know I didn't answer the question probably the
No,
way you
you
wanted,
did.
but
You did it.
that's what's come through.
And I really appreciate it, because it's not all about studying things. It's not all about science. It's not all about that.
Mhm.
It's really about the human connection. And, you know, ultimately that is what we want, right? We want connection, community, love. You know, we want to be able to have, you know, a wonderful, safe world. And, you know, those stories too, I love that people are coming more and more out. And one of the stories that came up today here at the conference I'm at is this one man came up and, you know, very healthy looking, very, very, you know, robust, and said, you know, 2-3 years ago, you wouldn't have recognized me. I was emaciated, living on the street, you know, using meth and heroin, and, you know, just saw the right podcast at the right time and stars aligned. And, you know, a psilocybin session later, he's got his life back, and now he's giving his life now to raise funds and donate every dollar he makes back to therapy. So other people,
Wow.
like the generosity of people, that must be a theme you see in these stories too.
Overwhelming. Yeah, especially because the first pile of stories came through folks that I've known from the psychedelic community of, you know, business builders and entrepreneurs. And all those stories are all, yeah, I was down and I was out and, you know, this and that. And then they had a psychedelic experience which shifted them and changed their life. And now they're giving something away. They're building this thing to do this thing. And there's a lot to say about the corporatization of this stuff, but I think that there are a lot of really good people trying to do really good things because of the things that they've gone through and the experiences that they had. So I have a lot of hope and optimism for that. Oh, you're still muted.
Okay, it's one of those things that dropped
There you
down
go.
every time we went. So, okay, so you got a bunch on the website, a bunch in the can ready to go, hundreds lined up. I mean, that's a lot. How long are you gonna go on this? Like, and people obviously should keep signing up.
Yeah, please. Yeah. I mean, I still don't think we're diverse enough. Like, I think there's still like a lot of angles that aren't being shared. And the idea here is that, you know, there's a lot of talk about inclusivity and gender and race and tradition and all of these types of things. And there's a lot happening in I would say silos and in these tiny little vacuums as part of this bigger vacuum that we're all in. Really, we're still inside a really I'd still say it's a small vacuum actually. So there's still a lot of diversity that we need to bring into the mix. And I think the only way to really like fully, or if someone feels called to share something and they feel like their voice isn't being heard or the archetype of their identity is not being heard, whatever that may be, then they should feel called to tell their story. And the approach and the format is really about not us telling the story for you or taking your information and then sharing it. It's about giving you the chance to share your story the way you want to. We're just providing some guidance for it. So I think that there's a long way to go here. TED has been our kind of muse, like I said in the beginning, and they have 1,500, 2,000 stories or so, presentations on their site. So like they're still going. There's obviously the format is there. You know, we want to do some in-person stuff. I think that takes it up a notch quality wise, but I think, you know, we would like to be putting up around 30 stories a month, fresh stories a month. And I think we can get to that point, you know, mid next year if things kind of continue this way. Like I would say that it sounds like a lot what I described to you now, but we haven't even really done much to promote it, other than some of our initial connections like with you guys. So we haven't really done a tremendous amount, and we will be doing that soon. But I don't think there's an end in sight in terms of how this could go. I mean, I like to say every journey tells a story, and every story creates connection for someone in need. And how many journeys are out there? They're starting to track that now. There's like millions and millions of people that have had these experiences. So who knows?
Yeah. So it could be just like your TED Talk a day where you're showing up with a TED Talk, a new talk every day. Is it fair? I want to be very respectful here. Is it okay to let our audience know, or even have it on your website to say what communities are missing, what voices are missing here? And if you, I know, I mean, absolutely, we need more diversity, and absolutely, there's certainly a safety. I totally recognize it and acknowledge a safety to be a professional and white and be able to tell my story safely. And for others may really feel unsafe, and that we totally acknowledge that there may not be safety, especially if you've been, there's not a lot of safety for a lot of diversity in our culture right now. So is it possible to list so that communities that are still quite underrepresented in the storytelling project can decide if it's a safe venture for them?
Yeah, actually, I'll just start by saying we need help. So one thing that you've instilled in me, Pam, since working with you, was this idea of privilege, and that our privilege can be used for good. And so I acknowledge my privilege in this, being able to tell this story so freely. I think it allows me to help those that can't be a part of something bigger and have a voice in all of this. So that's a big part of what I'm doing, and which is why I brought that up. And when I talk about needing help, I also acknowledge that like therapy, different marginalized communities want to work with someone that they can see themselves in, or that they have a closer connection to. So we also are now putting together our volunteer program for our psychedelic story guide volunteer program. So we're bringing on more people like me to capture stories from folks. And so that's where I think the diversity can expand, is when we have more diversity in those that are capturing the stories. Because like you said, and like I kind of alluded to there, is that not everyone wants to tell their story to me. And that's okay. I like to think I'm open and I create that space, but I know that that's not complete. And so, another element of it, and this is starting slow as well, but we are also looking for what we're calling these psychedelic story guides. So if you've been familiar with the Fireside Project, where they have their volunteer base around psychedelic sitters virtually over phone, we're kind of doing the same thing, but for capturing stories. So if you are interested in being a part of that, and you identify with a marginalized community that you feel needs to be more amplified in the space, I encourage you to reach out, and I'll put my email in here too, if that is you. And I'll make my email available to anyone in the community that might want to share their story but don't feel safe to, that we can find someone else that may be able to facilitate that. And then in terms of the groups that I guess are underrepresented right now, I don't have a clear picture on that yet. However, that's part of the next phase of our strategy, which is coming up in the next couple of weeks. We're sitting down to kind of go through all of this, and including what we want to do with the next set of formatting and that kind of stuff. So we will be looking into that a little bit more. But for me, I think there's the things that are moving the needle are like end of life anxiety, for example. There's a lot of those stories, and it'd be really great to have that continue and be a part of maybe some of the regulatory change. And we have some different things that are coming up soon that we're interacting with some of those groups that are doing some of the policy advocacy stuff. So we're kind of bringing stories over there, but that's not the only thing that's going to move the needle after these things become mainstreamed. So going back to the idea of culture, we have to look at every side of it. So I think of even the traditional storytelling approach from the indigenous populations and the indigenous ceremonies and rituals. I created what I believe to be a cool process for this, and our team developed a really cool project. But there are other ways to do this, and there are other voices to be heard. And I think a real intention that I have next is to go into those communities and see about how they want to get involved and how they want to share their stories, and not be too prescriptive in the way that that exists and allow for them to create and share how they would like to. So long-winded, but it's the honest answer is we're not there, and the honest intention is that we're doing our best.
So I'm in a location that is going to be shut down in a few moments. I'm not, so I apologize for that. Okay, but I want to know this: any politicians? Have you gotten any politicians in your story telling to? Yeah.
To be what's the word? Wait and see. Stay tuned, I'll say.
Well, I hope so, because they're starting to talk, and I think that's what moves things. You know, when the athletes started to talk, more athletes talk. When doctors and nurses and healthcare professionals started to talk, more people talked. And I really hope that those that we trust to make our world better, who we elect to make our world better, will also step up and tell their story, and be partners in this with all of us, because we need this. They were at time critical. We have many things to do, and we have to do some good work here. So, Cory's details are in the chat box. Cory, this is absolutely a phenomenal project that you have done with the Nikean organization, Nikean Foundation. Nikean Foundation's website has been put in the chat a few more times. We're going to get you back in the new year, right? And
for sure.
Tell us more about updates on what stories you're still collecting, still need to collect, and some of the trends. And if you're a PhD student and you're looking for a cool project, reach out to Cory. I think this is a really awesome opportunity to get some qualitative data out there. That would be absolutely fantastic. So.
Yeah, for sure. And you're all part of this bigger narrative, and we all have a chance and an opportunity, and I think a duty, if we all believe that this is going to be what we think it's going to be, to share and explore and be a part of this revolution, right? This is what you guys talk about at the Psychedelic Association, and all things Canadian. The word psychedelic is Canadian. Like I like to say, psychedelics are more Canadian than maple syrup, because it actually was created, a lot of people know, through the poems and the stories that were shared by Humphrey Osmond and Aldous Huxley. And if you don't know the story, look it up. There's some really fun fun stories there. But we have a chance to do something massive here. And I think if we all sort of decided that we wanted to step up and share our stories, and that we believe that we're a part of this bigger shift, that a lot of good can happen. So yeah, feel free to share the site around, sign up to share your story, and share some stories with those that you think might get some benefit from them. Thanks for having me, Pam. And Cheryl, thanks for all your work and all the volunteers that make this ship run. Holy crap. I have so much gratitude for all you guys. And it's nice to see some familiar names on here too. I hope all is well, and a lot of gratitude to you guys.
So much appreciation for all you do too, Cory. You make this world a better place, and love to your family, and a lovely evening to you. And thank you for everyone who watched. We'll get this recording up soon. So if you're watching it now and want others to watch and learn about it, please send them to the website. It'll be posted in a little while, and definitely head over to Nikean and tell your story.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Pam.
Have a great night.